All
right, we are all set.
Green button.
The floor is yours, sir. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Nolan. Appreciate the little intro there, and give stalling for a few minutes while everybody's trickling in into Zoom. It's something I've grown used to over the past handful of months of, even though, Zoom starts at this time, you give it, 5-10 minutes and trying to factor that in. Everybody's finishing up dinner and just kind of winding down from whatever their workday is and switching gears. So appreciated that. If just in case you weren't sure, wow, I swear I've presented before. I'm just getting choked up for a second. Tonight, we're going to be going over a session that I'm calling Prefers Awesome Websites, Tools and Techniques for a Better UX. And so it's a little bit of information in case you just joined. Just add to and echo what Nolan was saying. Yeah, SAC Interactive free meetup discusses all things web and user experience. So if you're passionate about code, web development, whether it's like drones, games, Nolan, you mentioned Minecraft development. There's a student that had demoed some of the stuff they had done. Lots of variety of content and always looking for information there. And there's been a handful of great sessions ever since we've gone completely digital on these on YouTube. So definitely recommend checking those out as well. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Evan Dunham. The title I like to attach to myself is UX engineer. I like to say that that's a front-end developer that has a design degree or a designer that knows how to code, somewhere in between. A lot of times those are kind of one-off things. And the role that I've done is I know how to speak both those languages and translate between both those worlds. So if you'd like to connect with me further, you can hit me up on LinkedIn at Evan Dunham, and you can check out more information on this project on my GitHub account at Evan Dunham as well. Fun fact, if you try to go snorkeling with a beard, it doesn't work out too well because you can't get a good seal on that. So learn that the hard way, but a little bit of information there, and quite a bit of experience in my career so far. Right now I'm a freelance developer along with teaching for UC Davis boot camp at this point in time. And I just wrapped up a cohort with UC Berkeley Extension. And that was just a powerful experience to take everything I've learned over the past 14 plus years, working everything from production design, where I'm leaning heavier into graphic design, to just my venture into web accessibility. Handful of amazing clients that I've worked with, everything from Apple to Penn State, Scientific American. So I've gone all over the world doing everything from speaking at conferences, training clients, UX workshops, and a lot of fun things over the years. But what I was super excited about was to take everything that I've learned and share it with others, because it's great to learn something, but there's nothing better than seeing that aha moment from a student that's just I get it now, because I remember those in my early learning phase. And it's a powerful experience for me. And so thankful for the opportunity to be here tonight. But that's me. I'd love to learn a little bit about you guys, those of you who I have not met yet. I see a handful of students from the boot camps here tonight, and good to see you all again. Thanks for joining and your support tonight. I guess show of hands, do we have the reaction feature turned on? Is this your first time at a SAC Interactive meetup? Anybody? Couple? Cool. Awesome. How many of you lean more on the design side of things? It's design versus development. I'm trying to get a read on the room. Okay. All right. Let's see, on a 1 to 5, how you feel about your CSS skills as a whole? It's 1 to 5, how are we doing? I know, thanks, Alex. You know CSS, I know that. All right, couple. All right, what about web accessibility? Is this new to people? Show of hands, people familiar with some concepts there? Couple. Okay, cool. No, that helps out, just seeing where we're at here. One thing I'd love to hear, though, is if you take a moment to post in the chat, or at least follow up on meetup.com or LinkedIn, where you heard about this event, so that we can figure out where else we can network and get more information out there. That would be super helpful. But appreciate that little bit of information, because what we'll learn from today's lesson is that as we talk about users and user experience, is that we're all people, and that everybody comes from a quite a bit different background, whether it's design, development, whether you've heard about web accessibility, whether you're CSS pro or newbie, and want to make sure that I'm considerate of your user preferences and needs, as you'll see this theme of this session tonight on kind of augmenting the slides a little bit based on the crowd here. But first, I don't know if any of y'all are a pro wrestling fan. I was growing up. And so this is Chris Jericho in the days of WCW and 1990s. There's this joke. He's got like list of 1,000 moves he does. But so tonight's agenda, we've got a lot of ground to cover. And so I just thought it was perfect for this, and just remembered that. But overall, go through some terms and definitions, really diving into those media queries in dark mode or light mode, how to build some iOS shortcuts that'll help leveraging that functionality, getting deep into CSS properties and SCSS, and exploring a little bit about different tools that we can use to create more accessible websites. So, all right, let's dive in. So the first bit, terms and definitions, because lingo, like we want to make sure that we're all on the same page and I'm not continuing to say a term over and over again. And you're like, what the heck does that even mean with that? So let's take a look at that. So in the title of the presentation, we see this word UX. In case you weren't sure about that, stands for user experience, and it just encompasses all aspects of an end user's interaction of your product or service, and really sets the tone of how they are feeling. Like, does the application feel safe, secure, trusted? Does it feel a little like broken? Is it a painful experience to use your application to where they don't want to return? Like, if you've ever, some websites that make it real easy to pay your bills, but other ones, it's totally a pain. And like, I think about ways that, man, how could they simplify that and make it easier? Like, if they want my money, you'd think they'd put some money into making the process easier. But user experience goes far beyond just the user interface and functionality. Really what we'll begin to be thinking about too, as we're exploring more UX, is like the navigation systems that we're exploring, and information architecture, different content chunking, and just ways that you can build less friction for a user. And we'll see some more of those techniques in the upcoming slides. But as part of UX, we'll learn a bit about accessibility for all users and how those two play together too. So a couple other terms you'll begin to see throughout your venture into web accessibility would be the terms AX and ALI. And you'll see AX, similar to user experience, is accessibility, but then you'll see ALI with the 11, because there's 11 characters between the A and Y in accessibility. So if you have trouble spelling, I could see where it would be quite a few typos with accessibility, and why that would come up as an acronym for that. So when you're searching for different tools, know that both of these terms will help you find tools there. But in addition to like accessibility, we're going to be touching upon some subjects such as like inclusive design and different design patterns that can be used. So rather than having something be a drop down or a radio button for, let's just say you're mixed race, and you have to choose an option, like which one do you identify with? Like, why can't that be a checkbox for multiple options there? And like, that is also another layer of accessibility, in that you're making an experience that works just for a wider gamut of users, no matter what their age, economic situation, their location in the globe, and so on. But I guess begin to be thinking about accessibility more than just the functionality and like being able to navigate a page just with a keyboard or color contrast. It's so much wider than that. Next, you'll see this term WCAG used quite a bit. It stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Big key there is the word guidelines, because there's a lot of different ways that you could solve the various, color contrast. They're not going to say, do it exactly this way. They'll provide some recommendations on how to solve those specific problems. For many, many, many years, WCAG 2 and WCAG 2.1 were the more popular guidelines that if you're exposed to a bit more of the accessibility world, you probably become quite familiar with those. And a big part of that being like color contrast with the 3.0 and 4.5 to 1 color contrast. But I have a couple links in here to check out later. But the WCAG 3 guidelines are being drafted right now, and how the contrast is being calculated is being studied quite a bit more with this term. It's, I actually just learned about this recently. They call it advanced perception of color algorithm. And so it's not so specific to it passes and fails at 3.0 and 4.5 to 1. It's factoring in the different font weights and sizes in between the large text and small text and so on. So I'll have some links to share for that if you'd love to dive into kind of what's coming down the line in the world of accessibility there. But a big part of it too is that it's trying to make it more plain language, because if you look at the WCAG documentation, it's kind of intense, and unless you know a lot of that terminology, I could see where a lot of users would run away because it's a lot to take in. And so the overall accessibility community is trying to make that more accessible and approachable for users. Next, cascading style sheets. It's what makes the websites pretty. It's so you'll see that term being used throughout here, the presentation. And then we'll also be touching upon SAS and SCSS. And that's just when that language became popular, or the preprocessor that is SAS is like magic CSS. Like CSS was already awesome, and then it just made it absolutely incredible. So it's kind of reducing in necessity now with just how powerful vanilla CSS is out of the box. But we'll be showing some mix-ins and different ways you can set variables tonight too. So those were some definitions that you'll be hearing. But first, let's look at a couple different types of disabilities. So the first question tonight is, are you disabled? In that, you can be thinking that not all disabilities are permanent, and to be thinking about disabilities in the terms of also situational or temporary. Or temporary will change or get better over time, and situational, it's just you may need accommodations similar to somebody who has a more permanent or temporary disability based on the situation that you're in. So an example would be temporary. You may have a broken arm, and so browsing the web may be a little bit more challenging than usual because navigating using a mouse may be difficult. And a couple other situations would be it's bright outside or it's too loud. So color contrast would benefit if it's too bright outside and you can't really see anything on your phone. Whereas if it's too loud, being able to see a transcript for a video would also help a user beyond just somebody who may be experiencing more permanent vision disabilities, or maybe they're a member of the deaf community and having to read content on the page. So knowing that a lot of what we do for web accessibility impacts users far beyond just what the spec would be, the WCAG spec would be targeting, and overall you get a better user experience there. But to simplify it, you may have seen something like this in your own house, that sometimes there will be a doorknob or a door handle. And a lot of times, really the only advantage to the doorknob is that you get all the germs from the last person that touched that. Whereas the doorknob, you could open it with like your elbow, or it doesn't require as much just the hand dexterity to open. And so it's an overall better experience. And straight from the Lowe's.com website, it says for use on interior doors where the push-pull function is required. And so it just makes it a lot easier for a user to open a door with the handle rather than the knob. So even the most basic things that we interact with on a day-to-day basis have user experience and accessibility attached to it. So key takeaway there is that accessibility equals user experience. So the more that we could think about reaching a wider gamut of users, the better user experience that we can create. And then to be mindful that we're all just temporarily abled. It's only a matter of time before my vision starts to go, or who knows what could happen to where I may find myself with a more permanent disability that could impact my ability to use the web. So be mindful of that and have some empathy for the different users who may be using your application and ways that you can enhance their experience. So that's a whole bunch of accessibility. So what do we do with that? So if you're familiar with CSS, you've seen a media query before. It's kind of strange to think that not that long ago, but then I go back into back in my day when I first started learning CSS, it wasn't a thing, and it's evolved quite a bit over time. But now it's difficult to imagine a website that's not responsive and doesn't use media queries. It's basically standard practice now, having a whole bunch of media queries of how to target specific device widths so you can have a delightful experience on both your phone, tablet, desktop, and so on. And let's take a look at the code for that. So the basic structure of a media query, you'll see will have some sort of modifier, whether it's not or only. And in that, what's the media type? I don't often think about it, but writing media queries just for your print styles versus your screen styles would be one way that you could target that media type. Overall, though, the media type is potentially going to be deprecated over time. If you look a little bit into the W3 spec for that, it's evolved quite a bit. And I've got an example of a more modern media query approach in a couple slides here. You'll see then the and modifier where then the condition is set, such as min width 700 pixels or max width 500 pixels. You can set some sort of property there. So what we're used to seeing, if we fill out this example here, media, it would be at media only screen and min width 768 pixels. So those styles would only apply to a screen, which the min width is larger than 768 pixels. But what's neat too is then being able to combine them with min width 768 and then max width 992, and you can target a very specific range of screen sizes there. But what's happening now is did you know if it's real easy, I'll just speak for myself with an I and me statement. Once I've learned quite a few tools in the tool shed for building websites, it's yeah, I got everything I need. And then realize, oh, there's lots of really cool new ways of doing things that are being added to browsers. So in the media queries 4 specification, it's changing a bit to be instead just more explicitly written. Instead of it saying min width 768 pixels, it's written to be more streamlined using greater than or equal symbols. So you can say if the device is between 768 and 992, and using the equal to or greater than, less than symbols to target those specific screen sizes. So if you'd like to know more about that, you can check out the Chrome developer blog on that. So it's pretty neat, something I'm looking forward to using on upcoming projects. Had anybody heard of that before, this new syntax that could be used for media queries? Couple, all right. Corbin, you know everything, that doesn't surprise me. All right. So what that leads us into is that user preference media features. What the heck does that mean? Well, what does that mean is two things that were the main topics tonight are prefers color scheme and prefers reduced motion. And it's their own type of media queries based on that user preference that is being set. So the first one we're going to unpack tonight is this one called prefers color scheme. So it's a light mode or dark mode. Here's a controversial question here. How many people use dark mode on their devices? Show of hands. See how split is this room here? Okay, how many are time of day, wild card? You just let it shift automatically? Okay. Well, I'm actually a light. I code in dark mode in whatever my settings in VS Code, but I generally use the light appearance when I'm browsing the web. But I know I'm kind of an anomaly these days where a lot of people use the dark mode. And I was well, I got to figure out how to get more comfortable with that. And the only way I'm going to is to make it easier to toggle it on and off. Well, if you're running on Mac OS, got a quick way to show you how to do that. So in your system preferences, if you go to General and then Appearance, you can toggle those. So based on how many of you have indicated that you know where that is, I suspect you can find that. But did you know there's a much easier way to set this? A couple different ways, both through the display drop-down where your notifications in your menu bar, and you can tap on that and it would have an option for dark mode on and off, so you don't have to go all the way into settings. On iOS, you go to display and brightness, light and dark, but those are a couple taps away. So shortcuts to the rescue. Show of hands, who have used Mac OS shortcuts or iOS shortcuts before? All right, cool. Get into the good stuff now. So I primarily had used this for playing a specific playlist or maps, using maps to get to a specific location. I have shortcuts on my phone. However, what's really neat is they transfer between devices if you have both an iPhone and a Mac, and the shortcuts that you can build out make it so much easier to toggle this setting. So I'm just going to show you quickly how you can toggle this and use these shortcuts. So when you open the Shortcuts app, it's installed by default on your Mac. You would click the plus sign here. It would then open up a menu, and you would name whatever the shortcut would be. So in this case, we can name it as Appearance Dark. We would go then type Set Appearance, and it will show a scripting result here below saying Set Appearance. Now, if you double tap that, it will open up the next menu that says Turn Appearance to Dark. And what that eventually adds is in a drop-down menu on your menu bar across the top of your Mac, you'll have a quick way to toggle between light and dark mode, which makes it a whole lot easier when you're developing a website that has light and dark mode with a single click being able to switch between those two rapidly. So now that we know how to switch between those, let's look at a couple code examples of how that works. And I'll show that drop-down in action there. So let's see here. I need to move Keynote down. And I have some code examples here. So I do have this GitHub pages that I created for this presentation that I'll be sure to share the link to if you'd like to check out the demos further beyond this session. But we're going to go into this prefers color scheme example here. Actually, I need to pull up my VS Code and increase the font size a little bit so we can see what we're working with here. Next, let's see. One thing I wanted to show right off the bat is before we get too far ahead, as you can see in the top right-hand corner here, I have these options here for appearance, light, and dark. And to show that the shortcut works, I can tap appearance dark. It'll run that command, and then it will quickly switch to dark mode. So you don't have to go all the way into the various settings to be able to do that. And just having something native on your Mac goes such a long way for that option there. So helped me a lot because I was getting real tired of going into the settings, being able to toggle that. So in this example here, you can see how we have example one, where I have it as basic as it can be with a white background with black text on it. So let me go open up some code here, make this a little larger. And then we'll look at this. So in this example one container, we will see that background color, white and black for the text color. Actually, let me open up this different CSS file. It'll be a little easier to work through. So should I bump that font size a little bit? What everybody's able to see here. So using a media query for those styles is as simple as typing @media and then parentheses, prefers color scheme light, and then it will set the CSS for that. But if you want to target specifically a dark scheme, you can write the opposite of that. So what was the white now becomes black and toggle between those two. So on the most basic level, it's pretty easy to do if you're familiar with media queries, writing CSS for responsive design at this point. So it's pretty approachable on how to do that. It seems like the more challenging aspect of it is being able to rapidly toggle between the two different modes and test your styles for the light and dark mode there. So that's just my example one there. But as we go deeper into this, you can see maybe sometimes it's not as obvious of what switching something from like white to black and so on. What you could do is swap this here. In some cases, it's going from like a light gray to a charcoal and not so exact opposite as far as the colors go. Oops, let me go back to VS Code here. So in the example 2, you can see that I'm actually targeting both the H2 and the paragraph tag here. So that way, sometimes you have to get more granular with what selectors you're targeting along the way. And so it can start to grow in complexity pretty quickly, but overall, you're creating a solution that's going to be more enjoyable for a user because it's targeting their specific preference that they've opted into having the dark mode experience. So it's a easy lift, relatively easy lift of what we can do to make something more approachable for them. The next example is if we want to get into more advanced CSS solutions for this here. So in this case, oops, keep tabbing over to the wrong page there. Visual Studio Code. So in example 3, show of hands, who has used CSS custom properties or CSS variables before? Corbin, okay, Linda, a couple people. Nolan, okay, cool. So if you haven't, love to introduce this to you for a moment, and definitely something to check out. So what's neat is being able to write my styles for just this div called example, where I'm setting a background color to the variable of example section background color and the variable of example section text color. And what I'm doing is based on the user preference of light and dark, I'm redefining what those variables are. So as it's toggling between the two, it's like dynamically changing it with the CSS that's being styled out for those properties based on just the variables changing in the CSS. So it's possibilities open up of creating like a light mode and dark mode color palette, and then being able to define the color or background color based on that token for that color, and it would switch between the two. So as your CSS, your application like grows, it's relying a little bit heavier on all those color variables rather than having to change it every single thing and making two different versions of it. So definitely something to explore there. And then with CSS variables, if you want them globally accessible for the entire document, you would simply write :root, and it would allow for those variables to be accessible there. And to leverage them, you would type var parentheses, and then using the double slashes for the variable there. So I've got actually just as an aside to this, if there's anything that you're like, what the heck, Evan, you're going a million miles an hour, I want to know more about that. In this link, you'll see I have a section called resources. Anything that I'm referencing in this presentation will be available to you. So if you want to dig in deeper on those subjects. So there's that there. But going back into the code, let's see here. That's just another example of that. Let's see what I'm trying to target between this and that one. Nothing special on that. Oh, the scoping. So in this example, we see how I'm targeting a root and making that globally available. So those variables are defined and could be used anywhere throughout the document. Whereas in this example 4, you can see that rather than using root, I'm using the ID of example 4. So those variables are scoped specifically to that ID, and that helps out if you could potentially run into some collision of that you don't want that variable applied to other elements that you don't anticipate them being applied to. So knowing that CSS variables allow you to do that, it goes a long, long way. Next, we want to get into a fun thing here with this example 5. So we have this light blue color, some text, and a secondary paragraph. Couple CSS things I want to show here. As we switch between the light and dark mode, we'll see it goes from that light blue to the dark blue. But one thing that could happen is bumping into some color contrast challenges with the CSS. In that, it could be tough to tell what the color contrast is from this to that. Anybody want to take a guess? Thumbs up, thumbs down if that passes the CAD guidelines with acceptable color contrast? That large paragraph? Well, actually, what if I told you that first paragraph barely passes because it's at a large enough font size that it can pass at the 3.0 contrast ratio instead of 4.5. But if quick little tip is that when you inspect an element on a page, and at least in Chrome, you could tap on this color swatch. And what it will tell you oftentimes depends on how the CSS is layered, if it's like a gradient or if it has shadows, there's a lot that goes into it, but you can see what the calculated contrast ratio is there. And if you want to confirm that it's actually calculated correctly, you could tap this little drop down here and it will show you that it's this color based on that color. And it will show how it passes AA at 3.0 based on our current font size, but does not pass 4.5 at that larger font size. But what's even more cool about this is you notice this color picker up here and we see these lines going through. Those actually show us the colors within those different ranges. So if I move this up, because we're above that line, the contrast ratio is set to 2.34. But if I go below that, now we're in the passable 3 ratio. So as long as I'm in this area based on that font size, everything's all good. So that actually saves a lot of time when you're trying to pick a color with that specific contrast ratio. So therefore, the next line below, that's the 4.5 line. And so we can see all of those options would pass that there. And you can see the color contrast is updating on the left as I'm dragging this around. But it's kind of wild to think that right here, if we're sitting right at like 3.1, there we go. I got 3.02, that passes, but that doesn't. So that's why the spec is changing, because there's very little difference between the two, and it's bizarre that one would be considered like failing and the other one is passing. But definitely, I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes you might just be barely failing as far as the color contrast goes, and just like with a little nudge darker, you can get it into passable color contrast. So definitely advise checking that out within Chrome to see what are the options you could use there. Next, just to land the plane on that point, because this is a smaller text block of text. Oops. Let's see. See, now it's saying no contrast information available. So sometimes, and I haven't been able to reproduce it all the time, but why the color contrast option doesn't show up, but trying to show, maybe it'll show up here. Yes, it doesn't want to work right now. Might be because I added that M tag there earlier. Let me delete that. There we go. So just that one tag being in there made this calculator not work, but we can see that the contrast ratio is set to 4.5.1. So that does pass. And we can see now that the type is smaller. This menu has shifted from 4.5 to 7.0 to show the AAA setting there for the darker color contrast. So super cool being able to check that out. So being mindful of the different type size that you're using and targeting that color, that acceptable color contrast that you're going for. Pretty cool stuff, right? Show of hands, who's seen or used that feature before in Chrome or their tools? All right, couple. All right, well, definitely check that out. It's super cool. Next, I've got a couple other fun things as we see a lot changes on the web quite rapidly. Saw this neat little article that was talking about animating backgrounds and where color contrast, so it's a little bit of a tangent, but kind of related. When you're checking contrast on like a gradient background, well, it's like fine here on one shade, but maybe not on the other. And if CSS variables were new to you, something that's kind of neat that's on the horizon is a little experimental at this point. There's a cool article on the Mozilla Developer Network on that, is being able to set CSS properties that then you could animate things like a gradient, setting, say, the angle syntax, setting a default value, and then being able to, like, on hover, set a specific property there. So this is like, what the heck? CSS is JavaScript now. Like, what is going on? Super cool for a person like me, who I'm not JavaScript pro. It's always something I'm like, I know CSS so well. Why is JavaScript so difficult? But it's cool to see what could be done, being able to set the value for a gradient to the value of that that custom property, and then reset that value like on hover. And so right now you can't animate a gradient to spin. All right, now it's just a quick hover here. It's toggling between the two modes here, but it's pretty neat what you can do there. And then another thing you can do with that, if you want to go super advanced mode, now I'm just showing off a little bit, just like, again, it's experimental. If you write in CSS for a long time, neat seeing what's on the horizon, being able to set a handful of properties that build out the gradient, such as like a start and stop. And so I have a gradient here with 4 stops. And if you know a little bit about gradients, you know it's like from color 1 to color 2, and it will blend between the two. But if you have 4 stops, that'll go 0, 25, 50, 100, something like that. The math didn't add up completely. But what you could do is set the 2 middle stops to both be 50%. And so on hover, I'm using that cool new property that's just added to adjust the gradient and animate a little gradient there, and rotate the angle all on hover. So before, if I saw that in some sort of prototype of like, you are absolutely out of your mind, like, I can't build that, like, how does that even work? And so it's neat seeing what's going to be possible now with native CSS very, very, very soon. But obviously be thinking about web accessibility and all that, and that you're not creating a situation where the browser tells you that it's accessible, but it's like is right here on the left side, but not on the right side. So landing the plane on light mode and dark mode, and somehow neglected to show that a lot of this too, same deal with when you're writing for the color contrast with dark mode. Don't forget to double check the contrast when you're in dark mode too, not just your light mode. It can be really easy to be like, oh, I'll just set it to this one, pick something that's kind of the opposite of that on the color wheel, but it may not have the same contrast as the opposite of that color. So be sure to do the due diligence, because you can see the curves up here are in a way different spot. So neat. Here's where I normally would have in my notes. Take a breath, take a sip of water. Any questions with any of that so far?
We actually had a question just pop up in the chat. Corbin wanted to know if that the CSS gradient animate that you just showed is behind a feature browser flag or not.
Not that I'm aware of. I'll share the link. I think it just got added to Chrome. Like, I'm not using Canary right now, so I don't think I turned on a feature flag for that. But I believe it's only supported in Firefox and Chrome at this point in time. Definitely will share that link though. Truth be told, I learned about it while I was putting this presentation together, and we need to dive a bit more into it. So neato stuff there. Any other questions before I move on to the rest, more of the slides?
Feel free to unmute yourselves if you have a question too. I don't need to babysit the room or anything.
All right. Thumbs up. We learned at least one thing so far. Doing okay? Rad. Like to see that. So let's go ahead and jump back into the keynote here for a few minutes. Actually, let me take that back. Jumped ahead there. Have a little demo here of being able to toggle more of the light and dark mode, because there's a few gotchas that I always forgot about in this. So you have your super cool website. In that, you can actually, one thing that I have not used that much in my career so far is the picture element instead of the, let me zoom the font size here so I can, so SassMeister is a pretty cool website with being able to test compiling SCSS and having an HTML preview for that. So if you have like a local project that you're working on, you don't have to start creating like gulp or grunt tasks to compile the CSS using an application to do that. Just allows you to test some SCSS functionality. And it's cool for creating a quick little code demo here. But one of the things with light and dark mode here, and I've seen it with especially the little thing that, I'm going to show you something here. Did anybody catch how the logo changes? Oops, I'm already in light mode. Between light and dark mode. Did it go? There it goes. So see how the Stack Interactive logo here changed to the reverse of that? Well, that's pretty easy to target with CSS because it's just setting the background image, and you could target which background image you're swapping out in there. But if it was an actual image tag, that becomes a little more difficult, because if all you had was just an image tag, you wouldn't have a great way to actually swap that out in the header. So one great use of the picture element is being able to have that inline media query that says media prefers color scheme dark, and you can actually swap out the image itself based on the light and dark mode. So you can see I have this wonderful placeholder image here that's in red with light mode. I can go to dark mode, and your browser's going to download that dark mode image instead of the light mode image. So super helpful in your actual HTML, being able to swap that out as well. You can get super fancy with your SCSS. Some of this is just so I can do a bit with the swatches, but I had mentioned with the native CSS variables being pretty powerful, but with SCSS, one thing you can do, let me try to make this panel a bit larger, is you can define, oops, thank you, scrolling, what the heck. So I have this map of colors here. I'll remove the highlight because that's bad contrast. Is I have a variable named swatches, and it's just a map of colors where I could define a color called divider color, and then like text color, and define a light and dark color here. And so that way you're building out that color palette that you can swap and reference on the fly when you're actually writing your CSS. So what does that look like? So I have a function called getSwatch text color light. And so it'll go and fetch that color when you're in this light or dark mode appearance. And if you're familiar, so if you don't want to write at include or at media, preferred color scheme light or dark, with SCSS, it's super easy to make your own mix-in to have something more human readable, to me at least, where I could say at include appearance light. And in that, what you would do is you would write at mixin appearance, and then set the variable of mode, or the argument of mode, that then gets passed in to a nested media query. Well, then it would wrap around all of the content. So I think I'm going whoosh on some people on the CSS side of things, but I guess for people that are digging into SCSS, know that you could make the code work better for you and what makes sense for your brain, that the syntax with vanilla CSS may be a bit verbose. So super powerful being able to make something I think is a little bit more readable and referencing that color map there, especially if you start having hundreds of colors that you need to reference throughout the application and switching between in light and dark mode. I recently had a project, it's been a couple of years now, where we had to do a light and dark mode, and then it got a bit challenging of like, well, the horizontal rule is this color in light mode, but that in dark mode, but it's the same border color on these divs, and then but the box shadow does it this way. And setting up your variables ahead of time goes a long way, so you're not finding randomly when you turn on dark mode something's the wrong color. So it'll make it almost forces you to be more diligent and organized with your file. So there's that there. I'll have that code available too if you want to check it out more after this session. In that, if you're familiar with Bootstrap and you're using SCSS and compiling their files, they also have something baked into their SCSS where they named their mix-in color scheme dark, and you could have their own custom color schemes there throughout. But it's pretty neat that even very popular frameworks are building this into the core functionality of the product. So check that out there. So that's light and dark mode. The next section here is, so I'll give kind of a trigger warning here. So show of hands, does anybody get motion sickness? Just trying to be mindful to not accidentally, a big thing I said in the information about this session was that it's not just making a more delightful experience for users, it's actually making it safer, because I guarantee you there's many of us that are building websites, like myself very much included, and I've after doing even more research here, I'm like, oh man, there's a few websites out there. I got to get in there and write some more defensive CSS, so I'm not hurting. Like literally, like who thought you could hurt somebody with your code? Like, so that's really something to be mindful of here. So if you haven't heard of it, they're called vestibular motion disorders, and I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so don't quote me on it. But it's basically like, in a way, like a hidden disability that you wouldn't know just from looking at somebody with no outward symptoms that they've got this disability that impacts their day-to-day life. The stats that I was able to gather online from vestibular.org say that as many as like 35% of adults over age 40 have experienced some sort of motion sickness in this. So like, that's a lot of people that could be impacted by this. So kind of important. I do have trigger warning slides before I show animations that can be problematic here. So I'll be sure to give you a heads up if you need to look away from the screen on that. I'm probably being overly cautious, but I would hate to be giving a session about being cautious and not be cautious about it. So there's a really cool website called the Alley Project that has an article talking about these different vestibular disorders. The main takeaways here, talking about the animations are, don't make animations start by default. Like make a user click with like on a carousel. Like don't just have it start animating when the page loads. That's one way that you could already make it that much safer. Being able to give some sort of indicator of stopping the animations too. Like, so I'll definitely allow you guys to dig deeper into this on your own, but knowing just having to start and stop, that's already an accessibility thing in addition to helping these users. Just don't start the animations automatically. And that already can go such a long way with that there. But I'm going to show you some CSS, how to make the web safer for users too. There's also a little bit older article on a list of parts, super critical website in the overall like evolution of the web, like so many great articles there. But they have this article called Designing Safer Web Animations for Motion Sensitivity. And the takeaways there were like, what if motion does more than just annoy you? And like, what if it also makes you sick? So kind of hammering home, like this stuff matters, and we as web developers can do better. So definitely advise checking that out. And in this article, they have some examples showing what are potentially triggering animations, and it kind of breaks down what about them were triggering. So with that, the next slide is going to have motion. So just kind of warning on it. This is one of the videos from that website. So pretty cool looking website here. It's like, oh, what's going to happen? So if I hit play, oops, you could see like, oh, they got this neat little parallax effect where the whole thing flips and animates. There's a lot of things happening there. Both the movement of like the 3D cube, the depth on the characters, how fast animation happens. So while visually that's pretty freaking awesome, from a motion sensitivity standpoint, like you're going to hurt somebody with that. So be mindful of, is that animation absolutely necessary? And if you really need to use an animation like that, how can you code it more defensively to where users like more opt into that experience rather than potentially harming users? So how do we get to that? this leads us to the media feature called prefers reduced motion. And in this, similar thing that could be done with your shortcuts. Actually, see, actually I got to put another warning here. In iOS, you can actually hit play here. If you go into accessibility, motion, and then tap reduce motion. So you can see at first, you see how the UI is animating quite a bit there as I'm swiping between all the applications. But when I toggle reduce motion, you can see those animations don't happen, and it just fades in and out between the two of those. So actually built it quite a bit of change happens at the OS level too, but that's how you would change that setting on an iOS device. Similar thing on your Mac. You go into the accessibility setting and go into display, and there's an option called reduce motion. But we don't have to do that because we're just going to use shortcuts to do the work for us. Similar process as before, but you just search for set reduce motion. And so you can see I have on my screen here, I have a couple options I've now added to reduce motion on, off, and I've got parentheses here showing what it's actually setting that to on my device. So it makes it a lot easier for me as a CSS developer to toggle between those modes and make sure I don't have some accidental animation bouncing around all over the place for a user that has set the setting to reduce motion, because that's what user experience is all about. We don't know who's going to come interact with our product. And if they've declared, hey, I don't want motion, like, why would you do that to your user? Like think about and have empathy for who they are and their needs, and make something that works better for them. So we've got our handy CSS that helps out with that. So I got a couple demos here, how that works. So on this here, I'm gonna go back to light mode because I'm sorry, y'all, hard for me to see it here in the browser in dark mode. If I go to this prefers reduce motion. So in this example, say, make sure I'm in, so I'm gonna set it back to no preference, which is the default setting on a device. Making sure that that runs, cool. So please avert your eyes if you have motion sensitivity, but if I hover over this button and it starts bouncing and going crazy, like, I don't know, some websites may do something kind of crazy like that. Maybe it's not like on a button on hover, but just something wants to get your attention, like, hey, like, sign up for our newsletter, bounce, 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 like just super obnoxious. That can be problematic for a specific user. However, when I switch my setting here to reduce motion on, now when I hover over that same button, pretty simple. Way less obnoxious and animated there. But I'm going to turn back to the setting that I prefer here and go open VS Code here and go to my other example here. And so now I've got an animation that I built just to demo this, transforming the scale from 1 to 1.3 and using these CSS variables to set some of those button colors. But the takeaway here is actually, thought I had two different examples. I do. That's supposed to say example 1. If you have an existing website and you maybe want, like, hey, I got some stuff I need to change. I can't refactor everything to make the default have no animation and more progressively enhance and opt into it. You could use a media query that says at media prefers reduce motion reduce, and in that I've disabled that specific animation on hover. So that's kind of a brute force way of doing it. There's an article I have linked in the notes that says, like, you can just reduce the animation to where it's like not as crazy, but in that showing that with just a couple lines of CSS, we can make the experience overall that much better. But so that's the way I like thinking about this is, say, back in my day, when I first learned responsive web design, mobile first approach wasn't a thing. It was like retrofitting a whole bunch of websites to work on iPhones, and everything was like max width this, max width that, and they try to squeeze your desktop design into a phone. That we quickly learned that that's not the smartest way of doing things. And so a more defensive approach could be, if the user has it set to no preference, then give them the animation. So you're like, almost don't do those animations by default. It's just if that no preference is set, then add it. It could be still technically a little dangerous for a user that hasn't set that setting, but that's kind of on that user to a degree, if they're to know of what tools are available on their devices to reduce that motion. There's not a ton we can do there other than really ask yourself, is this animation absolutely crucial, or am I just being kind of ridiculous with some of my CSS? So knowing that you have two different ways that you can target and style out something based on that reduced motion. Let's see here. What other stuff do I want to cover here? Any questions with what I've covered on reduced motion? Has anybody written styles for that before? All right, a couple people. Yeah, Nolan, are they all force muted right now, or are they able to unmute?
No, everyone should be able to unmute yourself and ask away.
Yeah. Corbin, how have you used the reduced motion before? Is there anything you can share on that?
Yeah, I've actually used it in JavaScript land. So like a lot of like React or Vue or whatever will use JavaScript to do like really complex animations. So like you can even use something similar to prefers reduced motion on native devices with like React Native. So there's been a few apps that I've built that have had this feature enabled. So
yeah, and so I mean, does knowing of that existence of that help just from the planning from the start? Is like, what is the most MVP form of this with no animations, and then what's the extra sparkle we want to add to it, sort of thing?
Right, and like it's important to keep in mind that like when building something like animations, you want to make sure that it is accessible from the get. So like an MVP without animations is definitely the way to go. And then adding in animations and making sure you're taking care of those edge cases is really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for chiming in there. I saw a hand from Linda too. Do you mind chiming in on that reduced motion at all?
Sure. For me, I make websites for people in age brackets, sometimes 65 and up. And for us, our company requires us to kind of examine like cases where sometimes we animate a button and it might disturb some folks. So we have to consider like if we make a fancier animated button or some kind of animation on the site, will it affect users, and how might we be able to do it better? Sometimes if we want to keep in the fancier animation or something, then we would use the prefers reduced motion in like a little side CSS, like a allocated space for that. But we don't use it too often because we don't usually add in fancier animations.
Right, just kind of avoiding it from the start unless it's like absolutely crucial for the overall task at hand, is what I'm hearing from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. One example that comes to mind with that is I don't know, you go to any website nowadays and the first thing they hit you with is like, hey, accept our cookie policy, join our newsletter, and all the different things, turn off your ad block, all the different notifications and modals that are popping up on the screen. It's kind of wild to think like, I just visited your website and you're just like, bam, 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 hit me with all these animations. Like that's a quick win there is, say quick win. People may be unintentionally adding more motion animation in something you may not think of as animation, as just simply how does the modal appear on a page? Does it like slide up from the bottom and then like fade in or scale? Really consider if those animations are necessary, or you're just trying to, I don't know, keep saying trying to be too fancy with it. Like CSS is rad, like you can do cool stuff with it, but are you just showing off, or you're trying to solve a problem? Just being mindful of what you're doing there. And so with that, because with the lens of UX, it's not about us and what we want, it's about the users. And it's if you can create something better for them, that's why we're all here. So that's the code portion. I want to show you all a couple of resources that helped me along my accessibility journey and tools that I use on a somewhat regular basis, and then a handful that I've learned through putting together this slide deck. The first thing probably like 5 years ago. I read this book called Accessibility for Everyone. Super, super amazing book. Quick read. You can knock it out in a day, but it really shifted my mindset from I have to make something that work for something that only impacts a small percentage of users, and made me think like, wow, so looking back a little bit when browser support wasn't as powerful and having to fix all these specific bugs for older IE and so on. And it's like, oh, only 10% of the users that impacts. I can't believe I'm fixing this bug. And it's like, there was glaring accessibility issues that impacted a way bigger percentage of users, that were just like, oh, we'll get to that later. And so it's just a bizarre thing as the industry, kind of just bad, like not that long ago. And it's not until just recently that there's been this shift of like accessibility matters, and having this part of your workflow from the start. It's not something you just add on to have your website be compliant so you don't get sued. It's we care about our users and we want to craft a better experience. And so what a thought, crazy, right? So in this, this book actually unpacks a little bit how in the physical architecture world address this issue as part of just education. And it takes years to adopt this from the start. You'll see where a building has an accessibility retrofit where they've added a ramp somewhere that like totally doesn't make sense. If you go to Disneyland and you're in a wheelchair and you want to go on Space Mountain, you got to go through like a back entrance and they'll wheel you through the emergency exit. You can't walk through the ride because when it was originally built, it didn't have accessibility in mind. Whereas if you go to like California Adventure, all of the rides from the start will have like wider pathways and factor in accessibility and the concept of universal design from the start. So if we can apply that philosophy to our thinking of making something better for everybody from the start, and not thinking of just like, oh, how do we kind of make it work, sort of, not really, for the like other group, we can just shift it to be more inclusive of giving everybody a great experience. Another tool that has been helpful for me is maybe I don't want to use the color picker in Chrome for finding just a color that's just a little bit darker or lighter. A website called 0to255.com. It'll create different tints and shades of any hex that you apply there. So if you need to figure out, I need to create like a hover state for a button, you just find a little bit darker shade, because it's not, sometimes be challenging to find the right color. And this is neat being able to, I picked a hover state that's like 5 steps darker or 5 steps lighter, and so on here. So cool resource there. Next one is Adobe, excuse me, Adobe Color. Pretty powerful tool here for building out color palettes, being able to choose whether it's like a complementary color, the different split complementary, and you can see the color wheel will change and how these colors are sampled. But that came out many years ago, but somewhat recently, they've added this accessibility tools tab across the top. And in it, being able to sample 2 different colors and see the different contrast ratio there. And it will show how regular text it will fail because it's at 17 point and below, but passing in 18 point or 18 point and above, or 14 point and bold and above. So that's what's considered large text versus dark text. And that's the 3.0 versus 4.5 contrast ratio there. And because this one is 4.0.9, it will pass the large text where it needs only to be 3.0. It will fail the 4.5 requirement on smaller text. So that's cool, being able to see that there and build these swatches out for any project that you're working on with different Adobe software like XD. Additionally, with this same tool, we'll provide some contrast suggestions. So it'll say contrast ratio 6:1 or 7:1, and it will show maybe it's making the darker or the lighter. So it's a couple different ways that you could approach that, and a few different suggestions that you can click on and then see the preview there. So pretty powerful thing. Something I didn't touch upon too much in this presentation was talking about color blindness. And one of the options they have in the accessibility tools is being able to test your color palettes and see what colors may be too close to each other to differentiate between one color or the other with various types of color blindness. So it'll indicate like, hey, this blue and this purple, they're going to be problematic with various color blindness. So letting the tooling take out a lot of the guesswork. So encourage you to check that out based on palettes of whatever projects that you're working on. So you can just be mindful and knowing something at least add to the backlog to be able to address down the line of what you can do there. Another super cool tool that I've used quite a bit over the years. I keep saying recently, but it's been a few years since I worked on the project for the Penn State admissions, and accessibility was very, very, very important to their team. And so in that, we used quite a bit of tooling to double check the different color contrasts that we're using, making sure that the headings are the correct headings. So you can see you can switch between the couple of different modes here and checking that your H1 is actually an H1 and not an H2 and so on. And being able to see different like screen reader text. So super powerful tool. What I like about this one is that you can either use it as a JavaScript include on your site that will actually make it just so you can use it on your like local dev, or you could use a bookmarklet that'll fire off on any website that you view, and it will do that audit there in line, even if you can't control the source code on that website. So pretty powerful what can be done there. And it's just nice, say, okay, green, 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 green. This all checks out, and you can see the different contrast ratios there. So one of the things with accessibility is I'm of the belief that a lot of people would do better if they had all the tooling that made it easier. But historically, tools have been expensive, it's been challenging, but it's getting easier and easier now that the industry as a whole is like, hey, this matters, let's do something about it. And so a lot of tools there to help out. A little bit last from the past here, WebAIM, it's still just incredible organization that has a lot of articles and conferences about web accessibility. They've got a cool contrast checker here that lets you adjust the different colors and test that ratio and comparing it for light and dark text. I bring this one up though, because when you're testing out different contrast tools, there's actually a bug on this tool. I'm surprised it hasn't been fixed. If you slide like the lightness like back and forth a bunch of times, it'll turn gray. Like somehow their calculation on however that color gets rendered, next thing you know, the color will get all washed out. So when you're testing and finding a better contrast ratio and tinkering both the lightness on both those colors, careful to not, next thing you know, you get two different grays that you're comparing. That is not what you're trying to do here. So, but it's neat seeing being able to see the contrast preview there. But why I bring up WebAIM is they also have a really powerful tool with different browser extensions for, I think, like Chrome and Edge, Firefox. But Wave, similar deal to Totally, will go through and call out any accessibility errors. Maybe it's an image that doesn't have alt text, and then provide information on how to remedy those bugs. So everybody likes different tools. This is just another example that can be helpful. One thing I will advise though is when you're working with automated tools that will like bark at you about different accessibility issues, is no tool will be able to do exactly what a human is doing, because it may say, hey, this passed contrast, and you may have white text over a background image, but like the background color behind that image is like a black background, and it might say this passes, but it didn't even look at what the image color was. So it's giving you a false positive that it is accessible, or may not actually be able to call out some of the known calculations that you have on your end. So mindful of that, not be like, oh my goodness, what the heck? Why is it, I got all these errors? Like, might not be as bad as you think it is, but also just because everything comes back perfect doesn't mean everything's perfect. So be sure to manually do an audit on your end and look for those kind of errors on your end. Another cool tool that I've used quite a bit is color.review, because we saw earlier that the Google or the Chrome inspect can be a little finicky at times, trying to get those colors to compare the foreground color to the background color, and similar to the color picker there. Plus, it's like a whole lot larger on your screen. You're not dealing with this tiny little color picker. It'll show you the lines that this is 3.0, 4.5, and 7.0, and tell you whether those colors, those color contrasts will work. And it provides a cool way to share a link to be able to send to somebody else on your team, like, hey, what do you think about this combination? And then they could maybe tinker with it and send some of them back to you. So pretty powerful. What I also enjoy about this tool is that it will actually show you a preview with that color combination with different headings and paragraphs and illustrations, button styles throughout the page as well. And we got a couple more, and we'll open it up for more questions. As far as color blindness goes, there's a neat site called whocanuse.com. And what it will do is if you pick two different colors to show the background and the foreground color, it'll give you the preview here, but it'll actually show you the preview of how those colors will look and the percentage of users that are impacted by that specific type of color blindness. And it will call out if that combination could be problematic for that specific type of user there. So like just repeating myself at this point, but a lot of issues could be fixed if we only knew about them. So if we equip ourselves with the different tools, we can just craft better experiences for our users. And this was just quite insightful to me that I'm like, oh, my purple button is blue for a lot of users. And I just, I know there's other add-ons and applications that you can install on your machine that will do more thorough testing of what the overall experience is for a user. But something to be considerate of is that your colors might actually be passing contrast for somebody that has regular vision, but doesn't pass contrast if they have some sort of color blindness. So like just to add that much more complexity to it. Earlier in the presentation, I had mentioned that right now in WCAG 2.1, the contrast ratio is based on the calculations of like this pass-fail, the 3.0 to 4.5, and it will generate that contrast ratio and just pass on either like large text or normal text. What that doesn't factor in is you may have, instead of it's like 18-point type that can get away with 3.0 color contrast, but under that it would have to be 4.5. So like, I guess one more try. There's like a middle ground. Like, why wouldn't a font size in between the small type and the large type be accessible at like 3.6 contrast? Like, if suddenly this one's passing just because it's a couple of font sizes larger, wouldn't it be more a progressive scale there? Especially if they factor in, if it's a bold font, it could be smaller. So it's the WCAG calc guidelines. A lot of research has been done and is going to be in the new spec where it's a bit more thorough and will calculate what's called a luminance value. And so we'll see a lot more variety on variety of like font sizes and font weights. So we can see like something if 16 pixels will pass at 700 weight, but it's I have to dive deeper into the tooling here. But instead of it being like a pass fail, it'll give it a rating of 0 to 4, and it will show that these all exceed the expectations, and like the X's are like, don't even use those, that's prohibited. And it's like on the edge, it's a little bit easier to understand what the how a user will perceive that color versus it being just so pass fail. So I thought that was a neat tool, being able to see what's going to be useful very soon. And with the example along the bottom, how it's showing where that would have like a 3 rating, and then this would have a rating of 4 because it's a little bit darker and the font weight's a bit bolder. So how this one have a 0 rating because the type size is a bit smaller. So how those get calculated. A couple more tools here. If you've looked a bit about colors when you're building out color palettes, you'll see it's kind of strange that when like, oh, to get an accessible yellow, it's got to be not yellow anymore, and but the red will be over here, and so the line would change quite a bit. And so I haven't used this tool, but what outside of this presentation, but what I thought was neat about it in this discovery is it actually starts to calculate out the WCAG contrast, but also the WCAG 3 value. So you can see something that may fail right now may pass in future years once the spec evolves a bit. So that's something to, when you're thinking about doing an accessibility audit, it might be a little bit more forgiving down the line with that color contrast based on your specific use case. So tool to check out there. Another one is accessible color matrix. And like, that's great. You've tested these colors, they work great. Next thing you know, someone on your team starts putting like that light blue on a button in a different combination that isn't accessible. So it will go and show you the preview of each of those, and it will it'll check the contrast to make sure it exceeds the 4.5 to 1. And so it'll show you combinations of the colors in your palette that you can use that are considered accessible. And if you have not got enough about web accessibility and ways that we make our websites better, there's a really cool resource on Udacity. It's free, and Google is the sponsor for that, on web accessibility, neat video course, super high production on it, talking about how to do like keyboard accessibility, window focus. There's it goes deep into the weeds of like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript development there. But if you want to learn more about web accessibility, definitely check out that course, because I watched it a handful of years back now, but it definitely made me realize how much better I could be building out websites. And now that I've rambled on for about an hour and a half now, just want to say thank you everybody for letting me share everything about web accessibility, colors, all these cool tools that we can use, and what I've learned and how we can all just kind of band together and build better websites for better UX. And because, like I said, the title, I prefer awesome websites. That's my user preference. Thanks, everybody. Any questions? Anybody have any questions? So I just did it all perfectly. No questions. All buttoned up perfect.
Stunned silence is always the way to go after talk. Thank you very much, Evan. That was fantastic, as always.
Thanks, Evan. I've been away from coding for a bit, so I learned a lot tonight. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, Nolan. And thank you all for your time tonight. I know it's later in the evening, but hope you all got some good little takeaways and some homework to check that out. I'll definitely send out the link, and it will we'll have that available on the SAC Interactive website for the code samples and all that to check out for further use.
Yeah, if we will get the recording of this video posted on YouTube soon, and if you're not on our mailing list or that sort of thing, we're on Twitter and Facebook. You can go to sacinteractive.com as well and sign up for the mailing list there. So just keep in touch wherever you like to keep in touch with people on the interwebs, and we'll let you know as soon as the recording for this is up on YouTube, so you can check it out. Thanks everyone for hanging out tonight.